people, I think, would like to hit me when I say this sometimes. It doesn't have to be painful, but it is always powerful.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. You know when you meet somebody and you are just instantly, energetically connected and drawn to this person? It feels as if almost you share a piece of your soul, or that your souls were meant to be connected on some sort of level. Well, today, that is exactly how I describe my guest. She is somebody who I have followed for many years. I consider her an elder in the community that is filled with wisdom and knowledge and information and education and insight that I couldn't possibly get anywhere else. Every single time she speaks, I find myself listening intently because I know that what she is saying is not only true, but that it is really going to change my life. One of my favorite things to do is to sit amongst people who have walked this life before me, who have experienced things that I may not have ever experienced or may never experience. I've shared this with you guys before, but I never want to be the smartest person in the room. I actually genuinely enjoy not being the smartest person in the room because I feel like I have so much to learn. And so if I'm the smartest person in the room, that doesn't leave me anywhere to grow or go. Well, today's guest is such an honor to have her join me on the show. I am joined by Katharine Graves, who is the founder of KG Hypnobirthing, which is a leading pregnancy and birth program in the UK. She's a highly respected hypnobirthing expert. She's also a hypnotherapist and a doula, as well as the author of the Hypnobirthing book, which has sold over 100,000 copies worldwide. Katharine has spent over 15 years personally teaching 3,000 parents and 2,000 teachers and maternity professionals how to support physiological, empowering birth. She's so deeply passionate about respectful, evidence-based maternity care and the importance of giving women the tools to advocate for themselves during pregnancy and labor. You're gonna hear our energy just thrive and run off of each other in this episode. I'm telling you, sometimes I hop on the podcast and there is just this deep connection with my guest. And Katharine is one of those really magical souls. She's a leader in this industry that I, like many, look up to, and I'm so excited to have her here to help you transform your birth experience to be everything and more that you ever dreamed that it could be. So without further ado, Katharine, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Hello, everyone.
I'm so honored to have you join me on the show. You've been someone who I have followed for many years. I have learned from you, and I just feel very drawn to the wisdom that you share. I feel like you are a wealth of knowledge, and it has been fun to share the online space with you and to have you on the podcast sharing my physical space with me is just, I feel just really honored. So Thank you so much for being here. And I'm very excited to have our audience be able to hear some of the things that you share. And I think to get started, I want to quote you with one of my favorite things that you say, and that is to get the birth that you want is simple, but it's not easy. And I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
I didn't know I'd said anything so profound. Yes, it is, because we've overcomplicated birth. And our highly medicalized system, there's tests for this and fear of that, and this intervention and that intervention. And to get back to just birth is very difficult. Mm. And just birth is simple. But to get back to that is not easy. One dad said to me, I taught them the KG Hypnobirthing course for their first baby, and I went back and I did a refresher for their second baby. And when I went back the second time, he said, when we had our first baby, I thought it's something that you do. I now understand it's something that happens. Which is, it's so true. You know, and if you think it's something you do, you're not thinking of it as a natural event. Because, you know, you don't have to decide how or when you sneeze. You don't have to decide how or when you yawn. Nobody has to tell you. And those are just natural events that the body does. And birth is the same.
And what would you say to women who are feeling that anxiety of, oh, when am I going to go into labor? And how do I know if I'm in labor? You know, I have the tips that I give, but what do you say to those women who are feeling that need to control the onset of labor?
It's dreadful, isn't it? Absolutely dreadful. I think most of the problems in birth are caused our fixation with the due date. It would be laughable if it wasn't so harmful. And then people expect to have their baby. It's quite extraordinary. If, for example, inductions tend to be done at 40 weeks, and it can vary, let's say it's 40 weeks, until, if you think you're due at 40 weeks, at 39 weeks and 6 days, you think, oh, I've been pregnant for a very long time. But at 40 weeks and 1 day, oh, I'm overdue. The baby's late. If people say that to me, I always say late for what?
Yeah.
It is extraordinary. And all your friends and relations call, 20 of them, and say, are there any signs? Has a baby come? And the stress is horrendous. So even if you hadn't been putting stress on yourself, everybody else puts stress on you. And of course, well, I don't know why I say of course, but when you're stressed, you produce the hormone adrenaline, the fear hormone. And when you produce adrenaline, it inhibits the hormone oxytocin, the birth hormone. So the more stress that you pour on yourself and people pour on you, the less likely you are to go into labor. So then they pour more stress on you because the baby's late. It is so counterproductive. It's so harmful. I think induction of a labor is a worse pandemic than COVID ever was. It causes more harm. It's wicked. It's dreadful. And women, I think every pregnant woman will say, no, I don't want to be induced. And then when it comes to it, 50% of them are. In fact, if you include a sweep in an induction, probably 90% of them are. We don't have an accurate figure in the UK for sweeps. But unofficially, I've heard midwives say, well, I think only about 10% of women go into labour spontaneously. Isn't that wicked? It is actually wicked. Because your body has been growing a miracle for the last 39, 40, 42 weeks, or whatever. And suddenly, everybody assumes it doesn't know what to do. That's just plain daft, isn't it? Stupid.
Yeah. So if you thought about a world that we did not induce, how many people do you think would go into labor spontaneously? Do you think 100% of people would?
Probably virtually. I don't know exactly. It's funny, when I had my babies, there were some things that are better and some things that are worse. When I went on Instagram and said there were some things that were better because we didn't have X, Y, and Z. Some people were horrified. I got abuse for saying that it was better not to have these things.
Wow.
We didn't have scans. And I'm not saying that scans are dreadful things if they're used correctly, which was quite good in a way. Midwives are wonderful in telling you if your baby's breech or not, but there wasn't a scan to find out. Scans can be quite scary because, oh, this might be, your baby might be this and your baby might be that. And most of them aren't. But that's just one little example. People just gave birth to babies. There was no question of having a cesarean if you had a breech baby. It didn't matter if it was breech or head down. Just gave birth to your baby. Partly because, of course, a cesarean was a much bigger operation. It was a major incision down the abdomen with a general anesthetic. It wasn't something that you did lightly. I think I only knew one person who'd had a cesarean. Whereas now, very sadly, women choose to have a cesarean because they think they're getting less pain, which is not true. Because if they've done a hypnobirthing course, you don't have to have a pain anywhere, or a great deal less pain. And they underestimated the pain to recover from major surgery. And the obsession, and it's absolutely correct. I shouldn't call it an obsession, but our only focus is getting the baby out alive. Well, of course, everybody wants the baby to be born safely, but surviving and thriving are two very different things. And not a lot of attention is put on the thriving. And the baby has not, it's going to be fine if you have a cesarean, but it's not going to thrive in the same way as if it was born vaginally. It picked up the microorganisms, which are the basis of its gut flora, its immune system, everything. It's such a fantastically awe-inspiring process, isn't it? You know, you interfere with one little thing and something else goes out down the line. And we do an awful lot of interfering these days, don't we? In the States, the cesarean rate is over 40%, probably nearer 50% for first-time mums, I would imagine.
Yeah, the latest numbers that we have are between 32 and 35, but I don't know how accurate those are.
The States is usually about 10% higher than the UK for all these interventions, partly because you have OBGYNs at most of the birth, and we don't. We have midwives.
Wow. Yeah, here in the States, you have to seek out midwifery care. I'm having a home birth, so that's
Brilliant.
not covered by insurance. But if, are not in a place to be able to take on that financial agreement out of pocket, then you could seek out midwives in the hospital. But because of our healthcare system, they are not available everywhere. And so there
No.
are healthcare deserts in our country that you don't have access to midwives at all. And so then you're forced to see an OBGYN and forced to go through that obstetrical model of care.
Mm. And I believe there are some states in which midwifery is illegal, aren't there? Or am I wrong there? Maybe
Home
I'm
birth.
out of date.
Yeah,
Mm.
home birth midwifery is illegal in some states, which is so comical to tell somebody that they aren't allowed to have their baby at the place that they live. I find that so funny. It's just such an overreach of government, in my opinion, to
Oh,
tell
it is.
somebody that you can't have your baby at the place you live. But yes, technically, home birth midwifery is illegal, but hospital-based midwifery is legal everywhere, but whether it's accessible everywhere is another story.
They did a big survey about the safest place to give birth in the UK. It was a while back now, it was 2011. But one of the interesting things that came out of it was that if you gave birth at home, well, if you gave birth in a hospital, and these were all normal, healthy women, you were 5 times more likely to have a cesarean than if you planned to give birth at home. There was no difference in the women who started the process of giving birth, but it was the place of birth that made that much difference, which is interesting.
But also not surprising at all because, you are safer at your house. You feel safer. You're more grounded at your house. You have midwifery care at your home. Once you step into the hospital, it kind of goes back to what you were saying that, your adrenaline then starts to pump and your oxytocin plummets,
Yes.
and you're being seen by a care team who are looking through the lens of surgical outcomes. They really
Or a
have been
patient.
trained. Exactly. Instead of being someone who is driving this ship, you are someone who is now considered more of a passenger.
That's a great way of putting it. Have you ever heard of the wonderful doctor? He's very old now, he's in his 90s, Dr. Michel Audin.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's amazing. He lives in London, and he was the doctor who invented the birth pool. And he had it at his unit at Pithiviers near Fontainebleau in France. And he thought this could be more comfortable for women to give birth, which it is. He hadn't planned for the babies to be born in the birth pool. It was just for comfort in labour. But women were so comfortable that the babies were born much quicker. And suddenly one day, a baby was born in the water, which is quite deep in a birth pool. And Michelle apparently leapt into the pool fully clothed to catch the baby. But of course, now we're quite used to babies being born in water, and we know it's safe and we know it's more comfortable. And Michel Audin, why I quoted him, he says the first intervention is leaving your own front door.
Mm,
He's a very wise and knowledgeable man.
yeah.
Lovely man.
I hope that I can one day have him on the podcast while he is still with us. Can you dive in a little bit more to the mechanics of water birth? I think that a lot of people hold a lot of fear around having their baby come out in water, not realizing that they are coming from a pool of
Exactly.
water.
They've been in water for the last 40 weeks, so why on earth should they start to drown now? They haven't done it up to now. It's because the baby only starts to breathe. It's various things, but the shock of the air on the skin makes it go, oh, and then it breathes. And it's not going to do that underwater because there's no stimulus for breathing. And when you think of it, it's a really gentle transition. The baby's been in fluid ever since for 40 weeks or 42 weeks or whatever. And it's probably feeling it's a bit tight in there, not a lot of space. And then it comes out into water of the same temperature because it's at blood heat. And suddenly it's in this fluid, which has got a lot more space, which must be really nice. And then the great thing is that nobody else can get at that baby, really. Mum picks it up and holds it to her chest. And if that doesn't happen, if a midwife picked the baby up and said, "Welcome to the world," and handed it to mum, it must be about the scariest few seconds of a baby's life, like being dropped on the moon without any explanation. Where's my mum? Mum is safety, mum is food, and the only thing it recognizes in this new environment is the rhythm of mother's heart, the rhythm of mother's breathing, the smell of mum, which is picked up on the way out. All mammals recognize their offspring by smell and vice versa, don't they? And they also recognize their mothers and their fathers' voices because they've heard them in utero, and they will look towards mum when she speaks, and they will look towards dad. And that baby doesn't need anything when it's born except mum. It doesn't need to be weighed, it doesn't need to be checked. Anything like that can be done in mum's arms. All it needs is mum. I don't know how it works in the US, but in the UK, everywhere is actually very good. At least an hour's skin to skin contact after birth, which is wonderful. Many people say it should be 40 hours, but nevertheless, an hour is good. It's less good what they do about clamping and cutting the cord, but the actual skin to skin, and it doesn't need to be, it's not dirty or yucky, it doesn't need to be wiped, anything. All it wants is mum. It's the only thing it knows.
We are less good here in the US when it comes to skin. I think that there's an overall acceptance that skin to skin is good and beneficial, but I don't think it's a priority for every facility or every provider. I think a lot of times you find that they want to take the baby to the warmer to weigh them and to put a diaper on them and then to swaddle them up and bring these new parents a swaddled baby, which obviously we know is not skin to skin.
No. Well, I think this is when your husband or your partner comes into their own, because the mums who do the KG Hypnobirthing course, it's really important that their husband does it with them, because mum knows what's best. I've had plenty of mums who've said to me, I'd love to have my baby at home, but he doesn't want me to. And it's only because they're ill-informed. But his role is not to tell her what to do, because actually women are awfully good at giving birth. Men are not at all good at giving birth. But what men are very good at is protecting their woman. It's natural, it's instinctive. And when it comes to birth, his role is not to protect you physically, but to protect you from all the interventions and all the negativity. And not to supply the interventions. His role is to patrol your impenetrable bubble of positivity and keep everything else out. And that includes, after the birth, which should be in the birth plan anyway, making absolutely sure that baby is not taken from you. You know, I think you've forgotten the birth plan. It says skin to skin, immediate.
That's
He's
really helpful to have that script of exactly what they can say, because I think a lot of men enter the birth space and they want to advocate for their wives, but they don't necessarily know how.
no, but they do when they've done the KG Hypnobirthing course. It's very funny, you know. A couple will come into the course. We do it online as well, but if I'm doing it in person, and you know perfectly well that actually he doesn't really want to be there. You know, he's a nice guy. He wants to support her. But the thought of spending a whole weekend doing hypnobirthing, you know, this hippie nonsense. And he tries to look enthusiastic and smile and shake your hand, but you know perfectly well he doesn't want to be there. But by the end, he is your staunchest advocate because you've given them logic, evidence, information. And so much of our maternity services are not based on evidence, are not logical. They're just, well, what we've always done. In the UK, only 12% of the best guidelines from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists are based on evidence. Only 12%. And I should imagine it's similar in the US, probably. If you had a baby 50 years ago, probably none of it was based on evidence. But nevertheless, and all the rest is what's considered to be normal good practice, which means what the senior obstetricians on the committee had always done. And there is no reason, so much has been started without any research. There was no, when I try to think of things, as I go through a birth, I think of lots of things. But for example, there's no research that a vaginal examination is a good thing. There's no research that a scan is a good thing. And I'm not saying they don't have their place, but their place is far too big. And no woman who has a scan is ever told the risks and benefits. She may be told we do a scan at so many weeks and so many weeks, and this is what we want to find. I've never, ever known a hospital that has on its website or gives a woman a little leaflet or something that tells them the risks and benefits of scans. Which is not to say that there are risks, but there's plenty of research which says so. But women are told, no, there's no evidence. Which again, as I say, they certainly have a useful place, but it's a much more limited place than it is now. And anyway, even if it's a really good thing, a woman ought to be in a position of making the choice, having had good information explained to her. And it's really, women don't get good information, do they?
Nope.
So it's up to them to get that information. So as well as telling women how to have a much more comfortable, probably much quicker birth, we also give them good information about how the maternity services work. And there are slight differences between America and England, but in principle, they're much the same.
You know, another thing that comes to my mind when you talk about implementing things that are not backed with data or improve outcomes is continuous fetal monitoring. What is that like in the UK? Because here in the US, most women, even low risk, unless you go in and advocate for intermittent monitoring, you're going to be subjected to wearing the paddles where it's continuously picking up on your baby's heart rate, which I think a lot of people think is a good idea without realizing that it actually increases the risk for further intervention,
Yes, it
increases
does.
your risk for C-section, things like that.
Mm. I don't think it's quite that prevalent in the UK. It's automatic if you have an induced labour.
Okay.
And since a great many women have an induced labour, for them, they would have and there is an argument for it, because the contractions are much stronger, much more painful with an induced labour. And if it's stronger for mum, it's stronger for baby, more pressure on the baby. So I think, unless a midwife is going to monitor the heart very frequently, there is an argument for intermittent continuous monitoring. But otherwise, it's, as you say, it's harmful. When you consider if you have an induced labour, first you have a cannula in the arm for the Pitocin. Then, because the contractions are more powerful, you monitor the baby to see if the heart is fine. So you have a belt on and the pads on the abdomen. Then, because the contractions are more powerful, a woman is likely to want an epidural. So then she has a line in her back. Then, because you have an epidural, you can't feel what your body's doing, which is the whole purpose of the thing. So you can't feel if you want to go to the bathroom. So then you have to have a catheter. So now, and women are not told these things. They're just saying, oh, I'm going to be induced, I'm going to have my baby today. And it's not, it's so utterly different. 4 lines attached to your body. You can't get into a birth pool, which is the most comfortable way of giving birth. And it's quite difficult even to get into a good position, which is most certainly not lying flat on your back, which is the most uncomfortable and least efficient position of all. But most women get their information from the movies, don't they? We don't live in a society where people give birth frequently, and you'll know somebody who had a baby last week and your aunt had one a month ago. So your only view of birth comes from the movies. And it is always somebody in hospital, always somebody flat on her back and screaming, probably with legs in stirrups, loads of interventions, and it's a most scary thing to watch, highly traumatic. And the sad thing is that probably the majority of women have a birth like that. And all the horror stories you hear are true, and they're also completely unnecessary. It doesn't have to be like that. But for most women, it is. I was talking to a midwife today, and her job is, in fact, a lot of hospitals have it now, a woman for a midwife who supports the mental health of a woman who's given birth. And why do they need support for their mental health? Because they've had a dreadful trauma. And why have they had that trauma? Because of the inductions. And it turns what should be a woman's the most amazing and wonderful experience in a woman's life, and can be, into the most traumatic and painful experience of a woman's life, which is quite wicked, actually. Absolutely wicked. But that's the world we live in. Unless a woman takes responsibility with her partner for getting good information, well informed, has to be very strong. It's funny, actually, isn't it? Because once your baby's born, you know perfectly well you're going to be responsible for this little person. And yet before it's born, you think everybody else knows better. And it would be so much more sensible to start taking responsibility right away. And you will have a better experience. Your baby will have a better experience. And you will give your baby the very best start in life, if that's the approach you take. And also, Birth is a team effort. I know that all mammals will go hide away on their own to give birth. And some women do, particularly if they've had a traumatic first birth. They'll say, I'm going to free birth for my second. I'm not going to go near that place. But I think that's a bit silly. I've not heard of anything bad that's happened, but I'm sure it will one day.
Mm.
But a small, safe place on your own with one midwife who you know is absolutely perfect. It's what all mammals do. Did you ever hear anybody of taking their cat to the vet to have kittens? Nothing would happen, and it would bite you. And that's exactly what we do to women.
Yeah,
It's
it does
incredible.
seem silly. It seems silly when you say that. So I grew up on a cow farm,
Oh,
and
well, you know
uh,
about birth.
yeah, and I think it's really interesting to think about how farm animals give birth. Horses, a lot of times, will lie down and they're on their side. Sometimes
Yes,
they give birth standing up. Cows stand up the majority of the time, but they typically leave the herd and they typically do it at night and they typically do it in we have tall trees in our field, and so they're in the tall trees. But if you're in a field that doesn't have tall trees, they will get themselves next to a fence so that they are
yes,
not vulnerable. Yeah, exactly, on all sides. And if there's any sort of bushes or brush, they will generally get inside of the bushes and the brush. Dogs and cats are the same thing. A lot of times you will
mm,
find them in nooks and crannies or dark spaces or holes that they have dug and they've given
yes,
birth overnight. And it's not until you wake up and go, where is our dog? And then you go searching for them and you realize,
absolutely,
oh,
yes.
they had puppies overnight. And so it is just really interesting. I don't know if you know this, Catherine, and this is something that I talk about on the internet. People are always so shocked to hear this, but you can perform a C-section on a cow and a horse, but sometimes we find that cows do need a little intervention. And I think a lot about it like I do humans, that for the most part, a cow
Yes,
will be able to give birth. But if they
yes,
have a very attentive and intuitive attendant, which in my case is my dad, will give that cow as much time as she needs to have her
absolutely.
baby. But he's very attuned to when things turn and he starts to recognize, I think she needs help. And
Yes,
so, where other farms in the area would probably have lost that cow and maybe that calf, our farm had kind of become known as the farm that was able to save both the calf and the cow. And
mm,
my dad had a vet friend that would come and do C-sections on the cow, and it didn't happen often. I actually never saw one growing up. It happened that infrequent. I've only seen pictures of it, but it's just, I think for me, it's very indicative of we don't want to demonize C-sections because there are cases that we
of
need them,
course.
but it is
Yes.
very rare that we would need them if we didn't cause them to
Mm.
be needed.
Well, the World Health Organization says that if the C-section rate goes above 10 to 15%, we're not improving safety.
Hmm.
And in the US and the UK, it's 3 times that.
Yeah.
And in some countries, it's 80%.
Oh gosh.
So, absolutely. I have a friend who lives near me who is a shepherd, and they always used to bring their sheep into the barn when they were lambing. And it's just like you said, they would go into the furthest corner or behind the shepherd's back, or he went into the house to have a drink or something, and there would be a birth explosion in his absence. And then it was discovered, or the theory changed, that it's better to leave the sheep in the field to get on with it overnight. And he said, I think it was the worst night's sleep he had in the whole of his life when he went into the house to go to bed, leaving the lambs of sheep in the field. But the outcomes were better. And nobody is saying that every outcome was better, but overall, the outcomes were better. Just like you said, C-sections have their place. Of course they do. All the medicalization which is available And we are really lucky to live in a society where it is available to us. But it should be a much smaller place than it has at the moment. A much, much smaller place.
Yeah.
The concept of not going to hospital is something that people find really difficult. Oh, aren't you brave? Is it safe? And the evidence is that it's safer. But people find that so difficult. Even if you give them evidence, the concepts we've been grown up with, the assumptions that we've grown up with, are so strong. I met a little girl. She was about 2 and her mum was having a second baby. And she said, Mum's going to have a baby and it's going to hurt. What is that child going to be like by the time she's 30 and has her own babies? It's going to be so deeply ingrained in her subconscious, she won't even know it's there. And that's how every woman approaches birth, really, which it's a fallacy. Birth, people, I think, would like to hit me when I say this sometimes. It doesn't have to be painful, but it is always powerful. And when you do a KG Hypnobirthing course, we are not promising a pain-free birth. If I could tell you exactly what that would be, but I do know perfectly well that if a woman does everything I say, doesn't think, oh, I don't like that bit, she's far more likely to have a comfortable birth. But that's her choice. Of course it is. We can give facts, but we don't want to put pressure on women because the OBGYNs and hospitals are putting pressure on women. We just want to give good information. But I've forgotten what I was going to say about that now, but anyway.
Well, one of the things that you said about the shepherd going in and having a very disgruntled night, disrupted sleep.
Yes,
He wasn't able to relax. I liken that to our hospital medical staff that they
yes,
feel as if they aren't watching, they aren't doing, they aren't intervening, that they
yes,
aren't doing their job somehow without
yes.
realizing that all of that watching, doing, intervening is actually causing harm and worsening outcomes.
Because what any creature doesn't being watched. If you go for a walk in the country, little animals might scuttle off into the undergrowth. Some animals are herd animals, so there's safety in numbers. Some animals are camouflaged against the background, like a tiger in the jungle or a polar bear on the ice cap. We don't like being watched either. You know, people are petrified of standing up in front of a group and speaking. And you can prove this to yourself, actually. If you drive up at red traffic lights and another car drives up beside you and you look at the person, they always turn to look at you. They know if they're being watched. It's dangerous. It could be a predator. We know if we're being watched and it's dangerous. It could be a predator every time. Anything strange is dangerous. Anything that's disruptive. Plenty of pregnant women, couples, might go away for a little holiday before the baby's born, a weekend in the country or something. But quite often when we're away, we get a bit constipated because the body doesn't want to leave a trace of itself in a strange place. It could be dangerous, there could be a predator. And you go home and all your bodily functions return to normal. Many people say, I sleep better in my own bed. It's not that the bed's better. It probably might well not be as good as a fancy bed in a hotel. But it's just that this is my safe place.
It's
And
familiar.
you're going to be even more careful about where you produce something as precious as your baby than your normal bodily functions, aren't you? It's crazy what we do. I suppose it started when pain relief was available in hospitals, so women went to hospital from that point of view. I don't know. That's probably the main thing. Maybe poorer people didn't have, well, poorer people couldn't have afforded hospitals. The Amish have got it right, haven't they?
They really do. I had the opportunity to learn from a midwife from the Amish community last year at a
Wonderful.
breech training, and she was one of the smartest people that I have ever encountered in the birth space. And I asked her to come on the podcast, and she told me she didn't have a way to do it. She didn't have a phone, she didn't have a computer. The only way that she communicates is by writing letters. And I thought, wow, that is so admirable. And also, I'm quite jealous that she doesn't have the pressures of technology, because I do believe, and we've alluded to this kind of in the birth world, but I believe that we've been conditioned to rely on technology, and you can see that
Yes,
in labor. We rely on monitoring and scans, and if things don't look good on a scan, it's almost as if we humans are unable to reconcile that it's a machine and that there will always be error.
yes, absolutely. And the same report from the World Health Organization, which in some ways is not my favorite organization, but it has its good points. It issued this statement in 2018, which said birth shouldn't have set times. You
Hmm.
know, you're so long in the first stage, you're so long in the second stage. Well, birth isn't really stages. And it also said that half the world has too much intervention too soon, and the other half has too little too late. And we are very much, obviously, in the too much too soon, which doesn't make it bad. We're lucky to have that help available when it's needed. But when it gets to be used routinely or overused, then it becomes harmful, which is sad because it's wonderful in itself.
Yeah. What part of the world uses it too little too late? Do you know?
Well, I taught one doctor to be a KG Hypnobirthing teacher. And most midwives, doctors, anybody who learns to be a teacher wants to support normality, less medicalization. But this doctor worked in the townships in South Africa. So her purpose of using the KG hypnobirthing was to make it safe for women who didn't have the interventions. Because they certainly, I don't know the details of exactly how it works. And if she was working in the townships as a doctor, there must be some help available, but not in the way that there would be in your community or my community. And
Mm.
there must be plenty of places in the world where, in remote areas or in very poor countries. India is a wonderful country and it's progressing so fast, but there are a lot of very poor people, and I'm sure they don't get any support in labour. Whether there is any support for them, I don't know. But it's highly medicalised, even more than it is in America or the UK. There's no such thing as a birth pool. Even in Eastern Europe, it's over medicalized. Women have to go to hospital. They have to be in bed. They have to be on their back. There's no pain relief. And it's appalling.
Yeah.
So different countries are different.
Do you guys do C-sections for breech and twin babies in the UK?
There is a tendency. The reason for the C-section for twins is that the second one is often breech. So it's really the same reason, isn't it?
Yeah, here as
Um,
well.
there was some research in 2001 called the Hannah trial, which purported to show that it's safer to give birth to a breech baby by cesarean. The methodology was suspect. They only looked at the choice between giving birth flat on your back with forceps or having a cesarean. And I have to say that given the choice, I think I'd go for the cesarean, quite honestly. All subsequent research shows that it's safest to give birth to a breech baby vaginally. And there's a lot of it. But it's curious, when research comes out which suggests that an extra intervention would be a good thing, it happens overnight, just like that. When research comes out that implies that it might be better to drop an intervention, we have to replicate that research. It's in the guidelines, We've got all this equipment. People are trained in it. And I believe a long time ago, they used to x-ray babies in utero before there were scans. And apparently when they discovered this was a bad thing, it took 25 years to stop doing it. Well, you could say the same about the Hannah trial. It's getting on for 25 years since the Hannah trial said we all ought to be born by cesareans if they're breech. And I would say in the UK, about half the hospitals have a specialist breech team for
Wow.
vaginal breech birth. And it is growing. And I think things change because women demand it. It's not the Minister of Health or a government commission or anything that changes things. It's women, strong, well-informed women who say no. That's how things change. And it was the same with breech births. There was one wonderful midwife in the UK who has died now. She even got a medal from the Queen for midwifery. But she almost single-handedly kept the skills of vaginal breech birth alive for many years when all the women were having cesareans. And it is growing, but it's growing slowly. All midwives, in theory, are trained in it, but many don't have the opportunity to put that into practice, depending on the hospital they're in. There was a town, one of the towns in England, Bristol, had a vaginal breech team. 10 miles down the road, there is another town. Sorry, no, that was in Bath. 10 miles down the road is the town Bristol, which didn't have a vaginal breech team. So all the women from Bristol who wanted to give birth vaginally to a breech baby went to Bath. So all the hospitals in Bristol were missing out. So then they all have vaginal breech teams because they were simply missing out.
Money.
Well, yes, it is. It's not quite the same because it's all on the National Health Service, but you still get paid more for a cesarean than you do for a normal vaginal birth. But it is money, yes. So I'm sure it's women that change it. And you have to be very strong and very well informed. And that will change the induction pandemic. If strong, well-informed women say no, and it's very difficult because the amount of scaremongering that goes on, you know, your baby's twice as likely to die, you've got gestational diabetes, you've got low amniotic fluid, it's going to be a big baby, which actually doesn't matter one tiny little bit. In fact, many midwives would say that a big baby is easier to give birth to, but you can scare a woman with the big baby idea. All these things, but if they get the actual facts, none of them hold water. It is quite wicked, the stress women are put under towards the end of their pregnancy, and it should be such a happy time. In KG Hypnobirthing, we have a wonderful concept for late pregnancy. You see, I see all these women put under stress by themselves, by their friends and relations, by all their medical caregivers. It's stress, which is dreadful because they've had a happy pregnancy and suddenly the last few weeks are not happy. So I thought, well, what can I do to help? And in KG Hypnobirthing, we have this concept, which I'm rather proud of actually, which is called bonus time. And when you get to 40 weeks, I say you're in bonus time. You have been given a few extra days or maybe 2 or 3 extra weeks when you can do whatever you like. The only time in your life that you can do whatever you like because nothing's planned. You can read all those books which are piling up on your bedside table. You can have a lie-in. You can go out to a movie or a meal in a restaurant with your husband. All things that you will not be able to do without a great deal of money and expense for many years, money and organization for many years to come. And if I was teaching a group and I had a second-time couple in the room, they'd be saying, yeah, you make the most of it. And so what I hope people will do is book themselves a treat every single day from 40 weeks. Not just think about it, actually book it. And it might be a lovely thing like a massage or going out for a meal in a restaurant with your husband. But if you haven't got a lot of money, it doesn't have to be an expensive thing. It can be meeting a friend for coffee as long as she promises not to ask if there are any signs of a baby coming. It can be even just setting your phone with an alarm 3 times a day, and every time it goes off, write down 3 things that you're grateful for. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's nice if you can throw in a reflexology or something because it's lovely, but not to try to make the baby come, but just because it helps you chill and it's nice. And if from week 40 for 3 weeks, you've actually planned and booked a treat every single day, you've got something to look forward to. And when somebody tells you, say, oh, your baby's late, aren't you fed up? You think, well, actually, I quite like it not coming because I've got a reflexology appointment tomorrow. And if you can help yourself chill in that way, it's going to come sooner. And then you have to cancel all those nice appointments you've booked.
It's
But I
almost
think
really nice to have a distraction, right? It's very nice to have something that fills that time that is not filling your time with anticipation of when is this going to get started? When is my baby going to come?
something positive to look forward to every single day. It's so important.
So, what would you say, slash, what are your opinions for women who get to that 42nd week mark?
So what?
That's my opinion as well. Is okay, are you
I mean,
doing
40
well?
week
Is
is
your
bad
baby
enough, but
healthy?
if they've been strong enough to resist all the pressure for interventions and get to 42 weeks, it is true that the stillbirth rate increases from 40 weeks, but nobody sets that against the risks of an induced labour, which are very considerable, hugely traumatic. And okay, if the stillbirth rate increases, which it does, it's still under 0.1%. So, you haven't even 99% of babies are fine, or even if I can't remember the exact figure, but it is absolutely tiny. It's one thing if a risk increases from 0.01% to 0.02%. So what? If it increased from 10% to 20%, well, you would take it very seriously and you would take that into account. But nobody tells you that. They say, oh, your baby's more likely to die, or something awful like that. An induction, actually, it is a fact, but induction of labor does not reduce the possibility of stillbirth. But that's what it's put to women that it does. On our website, kghypnobirthing.com, you can download for free what we call fact sheets. And all of the things women are told to scare them, it just gives them the facts. It's not a great big long dissertation on the subject. It's a brief paragraph, and then it points you to all the good blog articles, blogs, and all blog posts, and all this sort of thing. And I always say to women, never make a choice on the spot during a visit. Come home, sit down, and read the facts, and then do your normal daily practice. Have a nice night's sleep, and then in the morning you can sit down together and talk about it. But all those facts are there. The first fact sheet we produced was on induction of labour, but we've got one on shoulder dystocia, big babies, IVF babies, older mothers, all the things that women are told their baby's at risk. They can just go onto our website and get the facts. I think they're enormously valuable, which is just free sitting there. I wish more women used it.
Yeah, and we'll link it in the show notes for everybody. I want to hear your opinion on shoulder dystocia because I think it's something that carries a lot of fear. And here in the US, we don't use putting people on hands and knees, which could be otherwise known as the
Yes,
Gatlin maneuver, which she obviously got from the Guatemalan midwives, but we don't use that. We put people on their back and then we do something like the Mac Roberts or the
yes.
wood screw something. We've got different maneuvers, but they are not conducive to
No.
actually resolving shoulder dystocia.
Well, I've been told, and I haven't seen the evidence so I try to give only information that I know is evidence-based. But I've been told that you're more likely to have dystocia, shoulder dystocia, if you have an induced labour,
Yes,
which you were
that's
told
correct.
that because it was a big baby and you might get shoulder dystocia. Because if you have an induced labour, you're more likely to have an epidural. Your body isn't moving and responding in the way it naturally should. And therefore, as we know, the pelvis at the top is wider. You can feel your hip bones. And at the bottom is wider front to back, longer front to back. So our heads are longer front to back. So at the top of the pelvis, the baby's head goes in sideways for no reason other than it fits better. And then it gets to the point where it can't get down very easily. So it just rotates to face the back. So if a woman is in a position which is not conducive to that, if she's had an epidural, so her muscles are working and not telling her what to do, then she's more likely that the baby might not be moving this natural movement through the pelvis that it would if she hadn't had the epidural, which she's had because she had an induced labor.
I also want to point out that Pitocin has a lot to do with that as well, because you don't
Yes,
have that feedback loop that you would with endogenous oxytocin, because when your baby becomes a little bit stuck or they need a little bit more help or time corkscrewing down in your pelvis, if you don't have Pitocin, you have this feedback in your brain that says, hold up on the oxytocin and let's get this baby in a better position, and then we can give you more oxytocin. With Pitocin, you don't have that. It's a continuous drip, it's run
yes.
by a machine, and instead we just find babies are just grinding down, and then now you're in more pain, your baby appears stuck, your hospital staff then says what? Let's give them more Pitocin, which is not the answer. It's the opposite of what we want. And we're just shoving this baby through this pelvis, which, of course, is going to increase your risk of complications like shoulder dystocia.
Because, as you say, synthetic oxytocin, which is what Pitocin is, pumped into your body, but it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So the natural oxytocin, which is produced in the brain, when we produce the oxytocin, it triggers the production of endorphins, which helps labor be more comfortable. So you've got the more powerful contractions with the Pitocin, but you're not producing a hormone that makes it more comfortable, which is why you're more likely to need an epidural. And what's even worse, if you go to the point after the birth, which is something that women very seldom think about, that precious hour after birth, which is often called the golden hour, and it should be the most wonderful hour, one of the most important hours in a baby's life. And the routine is what's called a managed third stage. In the UK, they call it delayed cord clamping. It's 1 to 3 minutes. Not long enough, but it's better than immediate. And then they give the woman an injection, which is Pitocin, which makes the uterine muscles work to expel the placenta. And in case it gets expelled to contract too quickly, they then put controlled traction on the cord to make sure the placenta's out before the uterus contracts so much that it's stuck inside. Sometimes the cord snaps. And also that injection of Pitocin, again, after birth, a woman produces the biggest peak of oxytocin in the whole of her life. You know, that was amazing. But if she's had the Pitocin, she doesn't, because her body knows she's got enough, so it doesn't need to produce anymore. And at the same time, that peak of oxytocin triggers the production of prolactin to stimulate breastfeeding, all the bonding hormones, and it just doesn't happen. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that a woman who has that injection can't love her baby, because of course they do. But a woman who has had what is for normal, the managed third stage, and then subsequently has a physiological third stage with none of this intervention, says the difference is chalk and cheese. It is amazing. And yet it is very rare in the UK for a woman to have a physiological third stage. The trouble is, she hasn't even thought about it. The only thing she's thought about is giving birth to her baby. And again, in the KG Hypnobirthing class, it's so important that she is well informed, that she understands what's going on, and also that her husband does. Because at that moment, she's just given birth to a baby, which is a massive physical thing. She's holding the whole world in her arms. And if somebody approaches in her injection and says, it's just to stop you bleeding, she probably hardly notices. At that point, her husband is on duty to make sure, but nobody does. His role is to protect, and that's one of the important protecting moments, that he can protect her.
Do you think that cord traction can contribute to increased postpartum bleeding?
Probably, yes. When you consider a uterus after a woman has given birth, there's a huge amount of blood and tissue that has to be got rid of. As we know, bleeding is perfectly natural and it can go on for some time. when you consider the placenta is about the size of a dinner plate, so when it comes away, you've got an area in your side your uterus, which is about the size of a dinner plate, which can potentially bleed. So you're going to have blood loss. But it is said that if you don't have that injection, the reason for giving the injection is it makes the uterine muscles contract, so that area that could bleed becomes smaller. But the bleeding goes on for longer, and you've got the risk of the cord traction. It is said that if you have that injection, you bleed less at the beginning, but it goes on for longer, and overall your blood loss is more. If you don't have it, you just have the natural bleeding at the beginning, but it stops sooner, and the overall the blood loss is less. I think another thing that women don't expect when they've given birth is that the contractions go on after a baby's born. You think, oh, I've had my baby. What? And it's, of course, to get the placenta. The whole thing is just so beautifully orchestrated. It is awe-inspiring. You interfere at any point in the tiniest little way, and it's going to have repercussions further down the line. The wonderful Mary Cronk, the midwife I told you about, she used to describe as labour like synchronized swimming. It's beautifully in tune. It's absolutely beautiful. But an induced labour is like chucking one of the swimmers into the pool and hoping the others join her. Which is quite a good description.
Yeah, that is a really good description. I see a lot of controlled cord traction.
I bet you do. It's norm.
Oh, it's so normal here in the US, and much like
It
the
is in the
UK.
UK too.
Yeah, much like the UK, it's very rare that someone has a hands-off third stage of labor, just a
Mm.
natural organic
Mm.
stage of labor. But when that cord traction is done, it's often done very rigorously and really aggressively, and
Mm.
a lot of
And then
times,
pushing on the abdomen as well at the same time, possibly.
yeah,
Mhm.
possibly. I think it really depends on provider preference and maybe facility, but a lot of times we will see that lead into postpartum hemorrhage. And it makes me think that had we not interfered and we let the body do what it's naturally meant to do, would that person have had a hemorrhage? And, my inclination is probably not.
But also, if you wait, and in the rare event that there might be a hemorrhage, they can immediately have that injection.
Yep.
It's always there, just because you don't have it immediately. If it was needed, like every medical intervention, it probably has its place.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be given to everybody just in case.
Which is exactly how we use it, right? Just standard of care, and
Yes.
it's given across the board. Oh my gosh, Catherine, this has been so enlightening. I have one final question for you, and it's something that you talk a lot about on your Instagram, and I have found a lot of comfort over the years hearing you speak to this. So I wanted you to share it with my community. And that is, if our bodies are meant to give birth, then why is there so much birth trauma out there?
Induction of labour. I'm not saying, but that's the terrible thing now. But birth is known to be painful, and it can be. But when I teach KG Hypnobirthing, people will say, oh, it's mind over matter. Well, it isn't. It's mind with matter. We've been brought up to, a whole of our society knows that birth is painful, and it can be, no doubt. But if our minds have learnt to relax, and you have to learn, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to relax. If you understand what the body's doing, and your body's working in the way and in the position that it's designed to do, birth, some people do completely have a pain-free birth. And I'm not promising that. Some people, they say to me sometimes, if I do your course, am I allowed drugs? And I would always say, well, of course you are, but you might find you don't need them. One of the most comfortable ways is in a birth pool, isn't it? Some of our mums want a whiff of gas and air for half an hour. They might want to use a TENS machine for a little while. But I've almost never had anybody wanting an epidural, because you see, we can't teach anybody in a hypnobirthing class anything. a funny thing is, if you're doing something important in life, like an exam, you learn more. And the night before your exam, you brew up a strong black coffee and you really cram it in and you produce it on the day. What we teach is less. And it's quite a difficult process because we're not used to it and you can't check up on it. To get rid of the assumptions, the preconceptions, the stresses, the worries. It's why the 10 minutes a day practice is the most important part. You can get the information on the course, you can apply it at the birth, but that 10 minutes a day is when your mindset changes. And that's what gives you a wonderful birth experience.
It's almost unlearning what
It's
we
unlearning, yes.
conditioned to
It's a
think.
great big con that I expect people to pay money to come to my course because I can't tell them anything they don't know already. But I can help them get in touch with it.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Katharine, you are a joy. You are so forthcoming with your wisdom and your knowledge, and I appreciate how easy you are to talk to. I can
Can't stop me,
feel
can you?
I can feel how much you love women and birth and empowering
Oh,
people to really take control of their labors. And I just want to
wouldn't it
say,
just be wonderful if everybody did this course? And it's so
yeah,
simple, it's
yeah.
very affordable, and it makes a difference to the whole of your life. It's just so sad, but people think they don't need it, but they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if people wanted to learn from you or connect with you or take your course, or you also have a book, how can they do all of that?
I think you're going to put up the link, isn't it?
I will.
We have
Yep.
the course is available online.
Okay.
So you don't have to be in London and come to my course. So of course I'd love to see you. Um, but it's available online. It's very affordable. In the UK, it's £45, which is about between $55 and $60, depending on the exchange rate. And it's all there. The whole thing is in the online course. But the important thing is that you actually do the 10 minutes a day practice afterwards. And
Okay.
the nice thing about getting it online is you can always refer back to it.
Mm.
And the book you can get off Amazon in the US. It's not only available in the UK, and it's called the Hypnobirthing book. And it basically was written as the handbook for the course because you can't remember everything that you've watched over 12 hours or whatever. You can just look it up in the book.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I've
Absolutely.
thoroughly enjoyed it.
All right, you guys, I will see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Katharine on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by Hee and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm Hee, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.